Once I have my setup completed and the machine knows the stock that I'm starting with, I can start thinking about tool pathing. There's generally two operations that we're going to use most commonly, those being 2D contour and 2D pocket. What I really need to think about here is how I would want this machine to do the order of cutting. If I were to take this circle and cut out the circle part first, what that would mean is that I would have a free piece in here just kind of floating around and rattling around, which would be no good. The piece would go flying, the machine wouldn't cut it correctly. So I want to do all the inside work here first before I cut through this entire profile. So for this is obviously a pocket. It does not go all the way through. So for this operation, I am going to come up to my 2D milling tab, and I'm going to select 2D pocket. And when I come through here, I get some settings to where I have to input some stuff so that the machine knows what type of bit that I'm using and the values I want to cut out at. So I'm going to hit the tool button, and you should have a PLTW My Library, and for this one I'm going to use an 1/8 inch flat mill. If you do not have this PLTW library, you can find this by going to All Tools, and you can go by type. If you expand that, and you can go with a flat mill, and then you can search it by diameter. So for an 1/8 inch, just look for one that's 0.125 inches, and you should have an 1/8 inch flat end mill. So I'm going to select that. Now I have to set up the feeds and speeds. So this is going to be how fast the tool travels while it's cutting. And there's two values that I really want to change here. Based on the size of the bit, these values will change. You can get those from your teacher. For this one, I want to change my cutting feed rate. That's how fast the bit will be traveling through my material. For an 1/8 inch bit, I'm going to change this one to 60 inches a minute. And I'm going to change my plunge feed rate, which will be how fast the spindle will plunge down into my material. So I'm going to change that one to 30 inches per minute. Okay. On my next tab, it's going to ask for what geometry do I want to cut. So what pocket am I cutting here? So I only have one, so I'm going to select, and I want to get the bottom edge of this pocket. Don't get the top edge. Get the bottom so that it knows how deep to go. So I'm going to click that, and I can go to my next tab then. Now it's talking about the heights. The ones that I'm really concerned with here are the top of the cutting height and then the bottom height. So the top height that is selected is the top of the stock, which is fine. That just means that it's the top of the piece of wood that I've placed in there for it to cut. And then the bottom height is set to selected contour, which is the bottom of my pocket that I selected. That's why I wanted to select the bottom and not the top edge. So those are good. I'm going to come over here into my passes. Now this is going to set the behavior with what it cuts and really talks about how much material it's going to take off at once. The stuff that I want to change here is my maximum step over. So maximum step over is always going to be, that's really the bit's overlap while it's cutting. I always want that to be half the diameter of the bit. So in this case, I'm going to go 0.0625. And stock to leave, I'm going to leave that at 0. Stock to leave would say leave 0.2 inches, 0.02 inches there of extra material in case you wanted and needed to sand it down after it's done cutting. The material that we're using cuts very cleanly, so we don't need to leave any stock. But I do want to change and select this multiple depths. Multiple depths are how deep this bit will go before it starts doing its tool pathing. So the maximum roughing depth step down that I want to go is also half the bit diameter. So in this case, it's going to be 0.0625. And I always tell it to use even step downs, which means it's going to take the total depth and divide it by 3 to do its depth, so it cuts pretty evenly. And then it's just going to make sure that none of those depths are over 0.0625. So I'm going to go use even step downs. For my last one here, this is how it's going to plunge itself into the wood or the other material that I'm using. The helix one is selected by default for the material that we're using, any wood I just go for a plunge. That means it's just going to go straight down instead of spiraling into itself. Click OK, and what you should see, if you've done correctly, is you should see your first operation there, and some toolpaths should appear. So here, if you look by selecting it here, I have a 2D pocket that showed up, and it's showing my points that I have. And these are the toolpaths that it will go through. If I want to hit the Simulate button, I can go to Simulate and go to make sure stock is selected. And I usually go and uncheck this Show Holder just because it makes it easier. I can come through and I can press play. And what it's going to do is it's going to walk me through the movement of the tool as it comes through and cuts my material out. So you can see it's doing everything in multiple passes. And these are the movements that the machine is going to do, and there it's finished.